Welcome to North TV's second live debate here on this Monday, the 20th day of March. We are 2 weeks and 1 day away from Election Day, the general election on April 4th. Now, unlike the preliminary election when the polls opened at noon, the polls will open at 7 a.m. and will close at 8 p.m. Precincts 3 and 9, of course, will vote at Showcase Cinemas. The remaining precincts will vote at North Attleboro High School. This is one of, I believe, more than 10 hours of programming North TV is producing in advance of the election. Not only the debates tonight, our rally, third annual Old Time Political Rally, will be held Saturday, March 25th, 10 a.m. on the steps of the community school. That will be replayed right up until Election Day on our government channel, as will these debates, my one-on-one with the candidates special, and a special that Jared Ware, our government channel coordinator, is producing, the Home Rule Charter Commission, a look back at previous charter attempts, how this charter got on the ballot, and a discussion with key people who made that responsible. So all of that coming up on North TV's government channel over the coming weeks. And then, of course, election night, we will be on the air at 8:30 with live results. You won't find that on the government channel. You'll find that on our community channel, Comcast Channel 15, Verizon Channel 24. All right, we have our three school committee candidates joining us here at the police station. I want to thank Chief Riley and everyone here at the North Attleboro Police Department for welcoming us. Our three candidates, we have two incumbents and one challenger. The order was drawn at random. Leading us off, candidate A on my program is Christopher Frost. Candidate B is James McKenna, and candidate C is Adam Scanlon. The candidates will answer a total of 6 questions, all 6 by our panelists, our two panelists. To your left, Peter Cox of the Free Press, and Mike Kirby, of course, well known from the Sun Chronicle. We will begin with opening statements, and I want to remind the candidates to keep an eye on Megan Miller, who will be our timekeeper this evening. You'll have 2 minutes for your opening statements. We will begin with Mr. Frost.
Thank you, Peter. I'd also like to thank the panelists, Mr. Kirby and Mr. Cox, and my fellow candidates, Mr. McKenna and Mr. Scanlon. See, I get to use that first. First of all, I'd like to introduce myself if you don't know who I am. My name is Christopher Frost. I'm a graduate of North Attleboro High School. I've lived in town for over 30 years, and I have 4 kids in the school system. 12 years ago, I ran for school committee, and the reason why I ran then was so that I could ensure that my kids and their kids would have a similar educational experience that I had going through the North Attleboro school system. Things have changed over those past 12 years. Some things are better, some things aren't as good. One of them we know is funding. One of the things that I'd like to focus on in this next term, if I were to get elected, is to focus on the students, making sure that the right teachers are there. We've got great teachers in North Attleboro, and I want to make sure that they stay there in front of those kids. And I also want to make sure that the programming is there, because all this talk that we've had about funding, whether it's going to be there, whether it's not going to be there, those kids are still going to show up on September 4th or 5th or whatever day it is next year, and I want to make sure that they're taken care of. And going forward with that, I'd also like to make sure that we have the right facilities for them. And I think coming up in the future, we've got some good plans being put forth, and I'd like to see those through. So I'd like to welcome all of us here to this debate. I'm glad that we're all here in attendance, and I look forward to seeing you guys on Election Day.
Thank you. Our second opening statement will be delivered by Mr. McKenna.
Good evening, and thank you for hosting, and thank you for the panelists for being here, committing to their personal time. My name is Jim McKenna, and I'm asking for your vote at the upcoming town election. I'm asking for your vote because I believe that what I've been able to contribute as a school committee member is, 1, showing up at the meetings, but 2, also showing up at some other functions that are about the North Attleboro school system. And I mean the art fair, I mean the PTO meetings, I mean Veterans Day. I mean all of those things that I think as a school committee member, when you appear at those things, people identify that and are grateful that you're vested in their children. North Attleboro is very, very fortunate in this upcoming election by having 3 tremendous candidates, 3 people who will be committed to the school department, would be committed to the town. This town has heroes all over the place, and I have one of them on my left and one of them on my right. And the citizens of North Attleboro will be well served, but you have to go out and vote. So I ask you, if you do anything at the conclusion of this debate, please go out and vote. Thank you.
Our third opening statement will be delivered by Mr. Scanlon.
Thank you, Jim, and thank you to Chris. Thank you to all of the media here and everyone who is able to make tonight possible. Good evening. My name is Adam Scanlon, and this year I have decided to run for school committee in order to put forward a much-needed long-term vision for our schools, a vision that outlines a 21st century education for all students. The North Attleboro schools have been praised for a long time for its tremendous reputation in the area for students' academic achievement and its ability to come together. It's another reason why I love our schools. Our students continue to do as well as they do because of our dedicated staff and parents that go and beyond each day. Unfortunately, that perception may fade out if we do not change the leadership tactics of failing to bring in more revenue and not being able to provide for the needs of our students. We've been able to get by in the past after year of budget cuts that have all stemmed from insufficient revenue caused by a multitude of factors that include a lack of a long-term plan, outdated facilities, and a costly model of education, increased school choice tuition, not enough grants, and the unfortunate inability to engage enough residents and raise awareness about the importance of funding for our schools. However, the ways of cutting and continuing to kick the can down the road at the detriment of our students is no longer going to fly in this day and age. We are looking at a potential $1 million cut in the next fiscal year alone. The town administration has been telling us for a long time that the sky will fall. Now that it has, we are not prepared for it. You've probably heard the phrase, our schools are at a crossroads, many times before. I can tell you as a longtime student advocate that this is all true. We all acknowledge that we have a revenue problem, but I ask you to think about what governmental body is responsible for bringing in the revenue for our schools. I look forward to laying out my platform for this debate and getting to hear all of your ideas.
Thank you. I want to remind the candidates to keep an eye on Megan with the time cues. First question of this debate will be asked by Peter Cox. Peter?
Thank you. Over the past several years, we've had a couple of override attempts. And while a lot of parents may think that an override is the solution that they'll see in the future, overrides are never a sure thing. So my question to you is, what do you think the school department can do to help its budget issues? Are there more specific cuts that you see in the future, or are there ways that the schools can see more revenue for themselves?
First to answer that question is Mr. McKenna. Jim, you have 90 seconds.
Okay. You know, the elephant in the room when you're talking about the budget, the town budget, the school budget, is health insurance. Adam touched on that. And we know that the town administrator has told us that we're looking at least $1 million increase in that elephant, if you will. And it just so happens that that's about the increase that the school department needs in order to sustain the level of services that we anticipate are going to be required in next fiscal year. So when you have to factor in the unknown of health insurance and all the uncertainty that's going down in Washington and how that's going to happen, and we have a new Secretary of Education down there who seems to be focusing, or at least is identified as a person who focuses on charter schools more than traditional public schools, it's a real uncertainty right now. It's always been a moving target. I think that's a phrase that I stole from Chris Frost over the years. You know, the budget number is always a moving target. So until we really get there in June, let's not count our chickens before they're hatched, so to speak. We're going to have to wait and see where those numbers ultimately fall. But it is a scary proposition. We're trying to come up with some innovative ways in order to come up with some additional revenue. The idea of renting the Allen Avenue School for a modest sum is one. Over the course of the years, we've had cost avoidance when it comes to electricity. So we're very optimistic. We'll make it happen. We have that dedicated staff. We have a commitment from a bunch of professionals that will help lead us the way. Thank you.
Mr. Scanlon, 90 seconds.
Well, I think the other elephant in the room is the school choice funding that goes to all of the surrounding towns, such as Tri-County, Bristol Aggie, Foxborough Charter. And I did some research, and I know you probably can't see it from the audience, but you can touch base with me after. But I found out that the town is paying over $5.1 million to send students to other schools. And what I found most interesting is that the area where students are leaving is at the high school. So I thought about what can we do to provide more incentives for our students to go to the high school. And one of the first things I want to address is getting the full-time grant writer who can possibly seek grants to bring back some of the programs that we have lost and bring in some new ones. I think we really need to look at a long-term solution before we start looking at an override. And what I mean by that is I think we need to have a long-term plan in place that will address additional sources of revenue that will be able to keep up with expenses so that the override is not a bridge solution. Another area that I want to improve upon is trying to create a culture at the 8th grade and high school level where middle school students and high school students can interact with one another and really understand why NEHS is a great place, as the enrollment has really declined over the last 10 years. So I look forward to getting my ideas
Thank
out
you,
there.
Mr. Scanlon. Mr. Frost.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Scanlon, too, because you've set a pretty good platform for my response to this question. It's something that, if in the last school committee meeting, the school committee approved a feasibility study for improvements to the high school. And that's important because that is the tip of the iceberg of what we can do at North Attleboro High School. We know that the MSBA is not as in favor of new high schools as they are as to renovations. They've found that they've been spending a lot of money on this, and it's important to North Attleboro because we did a science lab. We renovated 1/3 of our high school with that science lab project, and the state picked up 52% of that bill. I believe that's important to dovetail what Mr. Scanlon had said, because we can make improvements to our high school, and we can actually introduce trades back into our high school. One of the reasons why kids are leaving North Attleboro is because there are no trades there. North Attleboro does an excellent job of getting kids ready for college, but there are a lot of students that will not be going to college. They're not made for college. It's not something that they're going to be doing. And I'm very excited about the way that this is going to unfold as we see a new high school, instead of spending $4 million a year or $5 million a year to Tri-County, actually using that money that we're spending, putting it back into our own infrastructure. And that is one of the most important things that we can do, and that's giving back to our kids in North Attleboro.
Thank you. Before we ask the next question from Mr. Kirby, just ask all of the candidates and the two panelists to pull the microphones in a little bit closer to where they are. That was a secret years ago when we had the table microphones in the planning board office. If you didn't want to be heard, you just leaned back in your seat and no one heard you. But very important for people at home to hear all of you. Next question will be asked by Mr. Kirby. Mr. Scanlon will be the first to answer.
I'd like to stay on the topic of the school budget. North Attleboro looks like it may be headed to another vote on a Proposition 2.5 override. Given the divisiveness of recent votes and then the voters' apparent earlier decisions that they don't want to pay more for the status quo, what can you tell voters that would sway them to increase their taxes?
Well, I would like to start outlining the plan that has a multitude of factors incorporated into it. I believe that we need to look at the solution as a multifaceted solution in getting more revenue into the town. I believe that before we start to head into battle to fight for another override, I think we need to look at some short-term steps and show the residents that this will not be a short-term solution. And to touch upon what Chris said, I'd like to also invest in infrastructure and energy efficiency to keep costs down in areas that we need to address, as NEASC had pointed out in their report. Another area that I would like to address is improving the technology in our schools and hopefully looking to provide one-to-one devices for all of our students. I feel like that could also save some costs by switching from textbooks to virtual textbooks. And I really believe that this plan I'm talking about has to be collaborated by all stakeholders, in which everybody has a say. Not all of the ideas can come from me, but I'd be happy to speak up for the areas that I am passionate about.
Thank you, Mr. Frost.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Kirby. Going along with that improving of the high school, I think by doing that, you're also opening up the community to programs, adult ed programs. And having that additional funding that we would be able to get into our budget to be able to offset the day-to-day expenses that we would have, we could use that better facility to bring in yoga classes or computer classes. Other school districts have done this. I believe Whitman-Hanson has a program similar to this, and it started with the driver's ed program. And from that driver's ed program, they were used to use that funding to grow their adult ed program. It's one of the things that really excited me about this looking forward at the high school, and a way to get the community back into it, and using that facility as a way to give back to the community. One of the other things that we would like to see as far as the Proposition 2.5, I don't know if we're ready this year, maybe next year. I think that we need to build up on this and to sort of build the case for it a little bit more. As Adam said, we need to look at how we're spending our money. Right now, we are one of the most efficient school districts in the state, as we only spend a fraction of what other school districts in the state do spend. But I think looking forward to that high school and using that facility to be able to bring in some more revenue for the school district and use it for the community, I think is important.
Once again, a reminder to keep an eye on Megan. Mr. McKenna.
Sorry. You know, when the former town administrator, Mark Fisher, really put his foot to the gas pedal and went around town and was instructing everybody or informing everybody what it meant to work from one budget to the next, and what a Proposition 2.5 really meant, and how 1.5% or 1.25% is really the only revenue that's available year in and year out. I mean, I was sold on the proposition that long-term financial solution is simply not to do nothing. I'm also concerned and balanced with senior citizens who are on themselves on a fixed income. I've spoken to a couple of them, and they're one gentleman said this when it came to the high school field situation, says, we simply can't afford it. My response is that we can't afford not to do it, because the collateral consequences of that when it comes to property taxes for that same senior citizen's home is going to be a loss of equity for them that they want to retire on. Chris makes a very good point. I'm not sure that we're ready now, because we're still licking our wounds from the last override. But when that last override was proposed, I didn't think it was enough. I proposed an override back in 2002 because you can just see the numbers going where they're going. Adam, you were at the meeting where David Flynn had the chart. He was saying, this is where state aid's going, this is where we're going. It has to come to a crisis. So I think it's disingenuous to suggest that we don't need an override, and I think it's going to come. Again, I think Chris is right. I'm not sure if we're ready for it right now.
Our third question will be asked by Peter Cox, and the first to answer will be Mr. Frost.
Sorry.
Now you can go.
Okay. This is a topic some of you may be a little tired of, but it's been 10 years since we discovered the value of the Afghans painting. So my question is there anything you can do to help resolve this issue? Because there doesn't seem to be an end in sight, and the town is still paying to store the painting.
Thank you for that. I think it's appropriate that I got the question first. Yes, there has been a little bit of buzz around town and in the paper and in the community about the Afghans painting. And I think over 10 years, some of the information kind of disappears and gets lost. At this point, and I'll set the record straight, we are currently not paying for storage because we have not decided to not sell it. So as far as Sotheby's knows, we're still figuring out how to sell it. And the only way that we could sell it is if ownership was determined. Now, you're saying, well, how do we figure out who owns it? Well, we have to go to court to do that, because along the lines, there was an an opinion, I believe, was drawn from the Attorney General's office that this was a charitable trust. Now, I'm not a lawyer, and I don't understand the inner workings of trust law, so I couldn't give you an intelligent answer about that. But what I can give you, the simplified version, is if it's a charitable trust, it can only be sold by the owner. Well, you need to know who the owner is. The only way to find out who the owner is to go to court to determine ownership. I am not in a position to spend $10,000 to $15,000 to $20,000 on legal fees to determine ownership. And I believe at the meeting where this all came out, I said I would be more than happy to accept any donations of pro bono work from anyone who is versed in trust law.
Mr. McKenna, same question.
Yeah, I think Chris kind of hit the nail on the head. I mean, the issue here is title. No one's going to buy this unless you can establish title. And right now, the title is, from what I understand, the 3 children, the town, and the Attorney General's office. Okay, I did go to law school, and I took that course, and I know Adam's going to take that course when it comes to constructive trusts and what it means for an Attorney General to have to absorb that role. The town, and this is scary, in a bad year, this year, at the recent FinCom meeting, was learned by me that they're going to spend $250,000 on legal fees for this year, and I'm sure it's all legitimate, but that's how quickly things can escalate. It has to be done by arbitration, court action to determine title, mediation, some kind of process that everybody has to be committed to, and everybody has to recognize. But again, until we clear the title, and I too am not prepared to go to RTM and say we want $75,000, $100,000 to determine title of this property, if that's enough money. It's kind of in stasis right now, and until someone comes in and says, I'm going to spend that money, I'm going to take 2 teachers out of the classroom, then I'm not that person.
Remind you to keep an eye on Megan.
Doing
Mr.
my
Scanlon,
best.
same question.
Obviously, I wasn't around when all of this business was going on, but I did take a lot of time to research this issue, as a lot of people have asked me about it as well. So my take on the issue is that I really don't think it's the biggest issue facing the town, but I feel like the process that went on over the 10 years is very telling about how some of the decisions are made or how we act as a school committee. So my kind of solution would be to have a new perspective, sit down with the family, and kind of see where we can come together at least. I feel like if I was somebody that donated to the schools a expensive item and the schools said, we're going to sell it and not tell you about it, I would kind of be a little bit upset too, to say the least. So I think by having a new perspective in there can really get the job done. The other area that I wanted to touch upon in terms of the last question, I think a lot of residents are unsure about where money is going. So if we ever look at an override in the future, I think we need to show them where funds are going to be going, and we have to tell them that these are where they're going, and we won't make it up as we go along. And that's all I have to say about that one.
Thank you. I would not be using my marketing degree from Bryant College, now university, without commenting that North TV will be airing a special North TV Reports the Afghans painting coming up in April. Now that I've taken care of that, Mike Kirby.
While the first step has been taken to renovate North Attleboro High School, it is actually the second newest school in the town. Most elementary schools, and there are 6 in North Attleboro, were built right after World War I, and one is actually nearing its 100th birthday. Meanwhile, surrounding communities have all fairly new public elementary schools. What do you say to parents of young children who are sending their kids to these students, and what can be done about this?
Mr. McKenna, you're first.
Yeah, you know, my son was in the portable classroom up at Roosevelt School, and I think they told us at that time that the portables are 10 years. You know, that's like almost 25 years ago. And you look at them, and they're, you know, kind of cruddy and dilapidated, and you make a very good point. Mike, when you talk about our capital investment in our schools. And we've tried to, over the years, make them more modern, if you will, on the cheap. Modern windows, right? It was a big deal when we put the windows in the community school. And Mr. Kummer, the Buildings and Grounds Administrator, is really looking at all these parts and seeing how much money he has and how he prioritizes that. We'd like modern schools. I think when I first came on the school committee, we had an analysis done of what it would take to refurbish all of the schools, and it was like $36 million. You're not going to come up with that money. So what we're going to do is we're going to put the paint where we can. The PTOs are contributing tens of thousands of dollars every year to all of these projects that we can't afford, like mobile computer labs. I know that the PTOs out there will know that. They're all trying to fund their own playgrounds as well. So there's an awful lot of activity going on amongst the parents to make their place better for their own kids. But
Thank you.
$36 million
Thank
is
you,
just
Mr.
not going to
McKenna.
happen.
Mr. Scanlon.
Well, I think the feasibility studies are going to have to speak for themselves. Obviously, Mr. Holcomb felt that based on the MSBA's criteria for a new building, that the high school was the most opportune building to improve upon. And maybe it's possible if we do, let's say we build a new high school, maybe we can move some of those elementary school buildings into the middle school or the old high school and see what we can do about that. But I would defer to whatever the feasibility study would have to say about that. But I think most importantly, in terms of the new high school, a short implementation step is that we really have to get the right person who is the most talented and most outstanding candidate for a principal. This is someone that needs to be able to bring this district together and really have a way to incorporate the ideas that NIASC has laid out for us. So I also believe that we need to look into improving our energy efficiency in the new building that we have. And I will see to it that if we decide to invest in a new high school, that in tandem with other funds coming into the district, that it will be a long-term solution. Thank you.
Mr. Frost, same
Thank you
question.
very much. Thank you. There's a lot of ideas been floating around town about what we can do. Parents of elementary kids that's the first time that this precious little person is leaving their house. So the school that they go to is going to be very important. And we have done some things to make improvements. We have, new windows, new doors, some more increased security. They've improved heating and cooling where they can. But you're right, the buildings are aging, and you've got this money that we don't have to do these improvements. So looking forward into this bigger scheme of things, if we can do a master plan, and I've had some conversations with the new superintendent regarding this, and some ideas that we've had is maybe keep some of the neighborhood schools and build a larger, more centralized, modern elementary school, so that some of the newer schools like the Martin School would stay in place, but some of the smaller, older schools would be replaced by a larger elementary school that would be divided into smaller mid-schools, kind of like what they do at the middle school. They have their teams. So they still get that feeling of community while they're at school, but they've got the latest technology, they've got the safest building and the most efficient building. It's just a couple of the ideas that are out there.
Peter Cox will ask the next question. Mr. Scanlon will answer first.
There have been a number of different proposals on how to update the town's playing fields. We're working with one now that seems pretty promising. But my question to you is, what do you think is the best plan for improving the town's playing fields? Is it the one that we are currently working on?
Well, I think because we are in such desperate times and are at such desperate measures, I was able to work with the superintendent and view what the capital improvement plan was over the next 5 years. And what I found out is that the number one priority for the school department right now in terms of capital planning is to invest over 5 years $1.6 million in renovations for fields on top of the $1.3 million for the turf field. And I feel like I would rather have some of that money from the future funds for future renovations go towards some of the technology and other infrastructure that NEASC has pointed out. It's true that NEASC did request that we update our fields, but I don't think we can be putting all of our eggs into one basket. And in terms of the turf field, of whether I agree with it or not, I think it's going to happen regardless of whatever I think. But I am a little bit concerned about the process that took place in that discussion. The Park and Rec, the selectmen, and the school committee had all agreed on something, but the town administrator retired, and there's a new rule book in place, and a lot of people have come to me and said, you've made it from a community solution to a school solution. That may not be the case in reality, but I can't change the residents' minds about that if they strongly believe that.
Thank you, Mr. Scanlon. Mr. Frost.
Thank you. And also, moving into the realm of the field at the high school, I think it's important that we do renovate them. I think it's important that we do have some artificial as well as natural surface playing fields. During this process, actually, Mr. McKenna was a huge advocate of the infill and the type of infill, because he was very concerned, as we all were, with the safety of our kids. Are we using the right material? Are we using a safe material? And it's been a conversation that we've had during our meetings from the very beginning. And it has sparked good conversations. And when we had the assembly at the middle school to educate the community on the types of materials and the types of process that we were going to be going through for those renovations, Jim was right there and asking the questions. And he actually took time out of his day to go to I believe it was a convention up at Gillette Stadium. And it was all these manufacturers and people from the industry that actually taught other people how these fields work, the maintenance of them, the types of costs you'd be faced with them. So do I believe that we should improve our fields? Yes, I do. I think the plan in place is probably the best plan that we've got, giving, again, the funding that we've got. But would like to see this follow through, and I think it's going to be a great opportunity for the whole community to use these.
Mr. McKenna.
You know, this will be a challenge to the community, everybody here, and anybody on the school committee. March 30th, 6 p.m., I will be up at the high school, I will be up at the track, and I invite you to come up there and take a look at the field, and we'll take a stroll, and we'll look at the field, and we'll look at what they want to do and excavate the primary field and use that excavation in order to solidify these other two fields. My daughter graduated in 2002, and I saw the field that she played on, and I cannot believe the condition it's in today. It's like this. It's useless. We've got all that land up there, and we're not able to use anything about that. I think this would be a wise investment for the schools. It is, you know, once you have the equipment on field, it's a whole lot cheaper to do the complete project as opposed to just bringing in the equipment to do 100-yard field. The expense of bringing in the equipment is killer. So that's why you want to bring everything in and do it all at the same time. It just makes economic sense. And Adam, I totally respect everything you said when it came to technology. You're absolutely right. But technology today is going to change tomorrow. You know, they gave me a new DVR because my other one blew up, and I'm getting like another 80 hours of recording time on the thing. You know, and it's smaller than the one that I had before. So technology is going to change. But again, March 30th, 2017, 6 p.m., I'll be there. Let's take a walk and talk.
Thank you. Our final question from our panelists this evening will come from Mike Kirby. Mr. Frost, you will be the first to answer this question.
2 years ago, the school department said it was closing the Allen Avenue School to save money. Students and teachers and other staffers throughout the system were sent to different schools. Yet the school continued to operate as an alternative program, and only recently has the administration discussed leasing it out to bring in money, to bring in some revenue. How can you justify to taxpayers and the students and staff redistricted while action wasn't taken? Why action wasn't taken sooner?
Well, I think part of it was a very sore subject for people. That was a topic that was brought up actually the very first time I ran for the school committee 12 years ago, and nobody wanted to close the elementary school there. And I think what ended up happening with that building was, although the building stayed open, It was the positions that were lost. And that's a hard thing to talk about, because that's people's jobs, that's people's livelihoods. And that's people's, again, I mentioned that community elementary school the kids went to. And they got displaced, as well as most of the district got displaced. And I remember a school committee meeting where we discussed that, and it was Kyle Kummer who mentioned that the building itself was not closing. The building had to stay open, because if we were to close it, then we wouldn't be able to reopen it without bringing it up to code. And that was one of the concerns. So then what do we do with it? Do we house other programs there? I think now that we have a new superintendent who's got some new ideas and who's watched this develop over the past 8 to 10 years, I think he's got a plan in place that's going to bring some money back in, help sustain that school. It won't reopen it as an elementary school, but I think what it will do is it'll help kind of mend that sore spot.
Mr. McKenna.
You know, the elementary school population really went down. And it became a point where, as far as closing the school was concerned, could you justify doing that? And it just seemed to me that it couldn't sustain itself. So we were in these budgetary crisis, and the decision that the school committee had to make at that time was, do we impose fees and keep all the schools open, or do we not impose fees and sacrifice a school? I took the position of sacrifice a school now because you're going to have to sacrifice it in 5 years. Guess what happened? We had to sacrifice it in 5 years. Nothing changed. Those fees did nothing to improve the fiscal soundness of the town. So right now, we have some vulnerable children who are at the Allen Avenue School. The SPED director said, hey, I've got these children that we can send out of district, incur more money, or we can keep them here and send them to the Allen Avenue School. The administration put those numbers together and came to the conclusion that it would be fiscally responsible in order to put those children at that school. There's some discussion about renting out the school, and there's always going to be some bumps in the road, and quite frankly, I've been shooting some emails back and forth to the superintendent expressing to him my concerns about this possible new tenant. And that'll shake out in the next school committee meeting, April, May, hopefully before, too long, so that they can get in there. So my time is up.
It is
I want
up.
to save you those 2 seconds.
Mr. Scanlon.
Well, I think regardless of anyone's opinion on that question, we're only getting $20,000 for a $1.2 million potential deficit. That's less than 0.5% of that deficit, $20,000. And I thought about it, and if we open up another school, I know we're not paying for students to go there, but let's say a student goes to the Dayspring School and they end up liking it, and that might not entice them to go to a North Attleboro school in the future. And maybe it's a building that could also have some reconsolidation built into it. Maybe the ELC could also move into there. But I think an area that I also wanted to touch upon is how I support school choice coming into the district, as we do not support it right now in our current policy. So I think we could see potential revenue from that in the future, but we also need to focus on getting the high school students back into the district. So I will advocate to get as many students as I can in Big Red Country, because I strongly believe that the education that I got here was one that will last me for a lifetime, and I want to continue that for the future generations.
Thank you. Thank you to our 2 panelists, Peter Cox, Mike Kirby. It's time for our closing statements, and the candidates might be saying, well, geez, it says CBA, ABC, the order. I realized about halfway through that it was out of order at one point, so that's why it's a little bit different than with the papers you have. But the first closing statement, 3 minutes, is Mr. McKenna.
Okay. Well, thank you for hosting this matter, and thank you all for being here. The room has a nice group here. I just want to comment one more time on the Allen Avenue School. It was a lost personality there. That was heartbreaking to see that, to truly see that happen. But at the same token, I've been able to attend some of the functions at the other elementary schools. I went to the parent dance at Roosevelt and AMVET a year ago, and you saw the competition between the two groups of parents. Oh, when we were at Allen Avenue, this is the way we would do it. We were at AMVET, this is the way we would do it. And when I went there this year, I didn't see any of that. You know, people come together for a common purpose. People are coming together for their children. And one of the things we saw in that NEASC report was that there is a tremendous relationship between the students and the teachers. And I can't take credit for that. I don't think any one person can take credit for that. I started off by saying there are heroes all across this town, and I think the heroes of this town has made that happen. I think the parents have made it happen. I think the children have made it happen, and the staff has made it happen. We walk in the shadows of those that came before us and the footsteps of legends. And that's all we're going to do is whatever happens in April, that's what I hope to be able to do. And I think that NEASC report is vindication for me in the sense that I didn't blow it up. It's there before I was there. It's there now, and it'll continue to be there, and I think I can help contribute to that. So I ask you for your vote at the upcoming town election. Thank you.
Mr. Scanlon, 3 minutes.
Thank you to everyone in the audience and everyone that helped make tonight possible. I also extend my thanks to all of the members of my family, friends, and loved ones who have helped me become who I am and supported me all throughout this journey. It's no question that I am a product of the North Attleboro schools and understand what each student has gone through. I set out to join this race not because I necessarily wanted to run, but because I strongly felt the need to bring a new voice and pertinent perspective to the school committee. I wanted to ensure, as I said, that every student, no matter what side of town you live on, is able to get the same quality education that I received. With $1 million plus cut on the horizon and a lack of a long-term plan to bring in revenue for the community to keep up with rising expenses, I do not know how much longer our reputation can withstand with more cuts. Being an RTM member for 2 years, having attended many of the school committee meetings, and being a longtime student advocate has brought me up to the speed on the needs of the students. We, as a community, must address many issues in the school department within a plan that I will work to bring to fruition in a timely manner. Not all of the ideas should come from me, but I would be happy to speak up for what I think will benefit the schools. Again, these ideas include investing in our infrastructure to reconsolidate facilities and bringing our model of education to the 21st century, expanding energy efficiency, reprioritizing our capital improvement plan to provide for one-to-one devices at the high school, and upgrading other technology, creating more incentives for students to attend the high school as well, investing in a full-time grant writer to expand or bring back programs the leadership has eliminated, advancing outdated curriculum, and most importantly, creating a culture in which the school department emerges with more people who have some doubt, engages with more people who have some doubt about trusting the schools with additional funds. All of these actions must be taken in order to make a long-term solution more palatable that will bring in revenue to keep up with expenses that will not only maintain our services, but also add on to them. I cannot change everything overnight, as I am just one person. However, if you send me to the school committee, I will work my heart out to ensure that a long-term financial plan that details viable solutions is implemented. In addition, I will request that we will undergo an audit by the state and make sure that there is no waste in our spending. The status quo is not working, and if we continue to do nothing, we are further putting our students' education at risk. The bottom line is we need to elect someone to the school committee who will hold administration accountable and convince residents that if we spend funds more effectively, that an investment in education is a positive one. I ask you all for your vote on April 4th, 2017.
Thank you, Mr. Scanlon. Mr. Frost.
Thank you, Mr. Gay. I'd like to thank you, North TV, and everyone here in the audience, as well as the panelists, for making this night possible, and my two candidates that I'm running against. Mr. Scanlon, I'd like to thank you for showing the courage to come out and do this. Many people like to talk and complain about what goes wrong. No one wants to do anything about it, so I commend you for that. Mr. McKenna, I'd like to thank you for going out again for the school committee. You've been an incredible asset to the committee the time that I've been on it, and you bring a wealth of knowledge as well as a level head. So I'd like to thank you for joining us tonight. And then I'd also like to thank my family and the voters and all the supporters out there who have allowed me to do my best for the North Attleboro School District. Some of the things that I've been able to helped the district with is the introduction of the energy education program. What that did was that helped the school district avoid spending close to $1.2 million over the first 7 years that it was instituted. And this was back 10 years ago. And we kind of let that go because that's something that we benefit from every day. The other thing that I'd like to also mention is that I was involved in the renovations of the high school science labs. It was a committee that we met so many nights getting that together, and with the help of the principal at the time, now Superintendent Scott Holcomb, it was accomplished, actually under budget and early. And finally, I'd like to also mention that one of the probably the most difficult things that the school district has had to do was enter into a search for a new superintendent. Too many times we had just appointed the assistant. We were faced with that fact coming up with the retirement of Sue Cullen, and we took the difficult road and we actually went on a search. We formed a search committee. We formed a focus group which actually invited the entire community in for their input, and I think the result was the right result. And so far, I think that Superintendent Holcomb has done a very good job in his first, I guess it's 45 days or 50 days or whatever he's in there. And I'd like to think that I had a little part in setting that ball in motion. So coming up in the next couple of weeks, I ask for your vote. I hope I've done well by all of you, and I appreciate all your support, and we'll see you in April.
Thank you. Thank you to the three candidates, Mr. Scanlon, Mr. McKenna, Mr. Frost, of course, Mr. Kirby, and Mr. Cox. Three candidates going for 2 seats. You will decide which 2 will serve you for the next 3 years. Election day is Tuesday, April 4th. Polls open at 7 a.m. They will close at 8 p.m. And then North TV will have live results on our community channel, Comcast Channel 15, Verizon Channel 24, election night beginning at 8:30. This is one of a handful of specials North TV is producing leading up to Election Day. We have the 3 debates tonight, my one-on-one interviews with these candidates, the BOS candidates, the Park Commission candidates, the Electric Commission candidates. We also have our Home Rule Charter candidates. In all, I think I did 20 interviews the week before. By the end of the week, I was babbling as I am now. This Saturday, the 25th, 10 a.m. in front of the community school, we not only have all the candidates I mentioned, but RTM candidates invited to speak to the community as well. On behalf of Chris Miller, our director, Megan Miller, our timer, Brett Poirier, who is acting as our host, welcoming everyone here this evening. I'm Peter Gay. Thank you for watching, and don't forget to vote on April 4th. Thank you.